So, you've discovered an entire continent full of indigenous people. Well, from my vast experience, let me tell you, you're in quite a pickle now. The teaching of the discovery of America by Christopher Columbus is a controversial topic. Not for any good reason, really. Christopher Columbus didn't discover America. That is not a topic for debate, it's historical fact. Not only did the Norse build settlements in Greenland hundreds of years before Columbus was even born, there's also a real arrogance in claiming that some guy discovered a continent that already had its own indigenous population merely because that guy arrived on a boat.
You can't claim us, we live here. 500 million of us. Do you have a flag? We don't need a bloody flag. It's our country, you bastard. No flag, no country. You can't have one.
But nevertheless, children in the United States were taught for ages that Christopher Columbus discovered America, that he did so to prove that the world was round, and that he was a brave, noble man who was driven by a spirit of exploration. In other words, American children were taught the exact opposite of the truth, because it's hard to argue for manifest destiny when your country was founded on land stolen from its original inhabitants by a misguided wannabe spice trader who, yes, believed the world was round, but was hardly unique in that aspect and underestimated its circumference by quite a bit. The Cold War obviously didn't make things that much better for educating American children about history. There was a concerted effort for almost half of the 20th century to prove to American children that, in every way, their country was ordained by God to be the light of freedom for all people across the globe. So it's not much of a shock to know that in 1958, a Disney songwriter wrote a children's album that mucked history all the way up in favor of teaching children that the United States was the only begotten child of fair-skinned Jesus and science. But it is fascinating to look at the animated special that adapted that album and aired for the first time in 1984, and the way that it just really didn't live up to its supposed designation as educational entertainment.
Well, here I am in my crow's nest on top of the old flagship, the Santa Maria. On our port side, his daughter, the pretty little Nina. On our starboard, her boyfriend, the dashing Pinta.
Ray Gilbert was born in Hartford, Connecticut on September the 5th, 1912, and would be raised in Chicago, where as a teenager he got his start selling songs outside of the nightclubs. Legend has it that his big break came when one of his songs was picked up by singer Sophie Tucker. But Gilbert's work would find its way into American homes through Walt Disney and the music of Brazil. Gilbert's first time hearing his music in a movie was in 1942, when the short A Zoot Suit with a Reet Pleat, starring Dorothy Dandridge, was built around his original song, A Zoot Suit for My Sunday Gal. In 1944, he would work with Disney for the first time on their exploration of South and Central America, The Three Caballeros, where his compositions included the title song, Bahia, and You Belong to My Heart. 4 years after that, he would share both an ASCAP Award and an Oscar for Best Original Song with Ali Rubel for Zippity Doo Dah from Song of the South, a song that Disney continues to use and profit off of while openly recognizing that the movie it comes from is way too racist to be re-released. While he was working on movie songs, Gilbert was also working for the live stage as one of Carmen Miranda's favorite songwriters, including writing the song Quanta La Gusta for her. His work with Miranda would become so well known in Brazil that he would attract the attention of Antonio Carlos Jobim, who would contract with Gilbert to write English lyrics for his compositions, including Dindi, Once I Loved, and If You Never Come to Me, helping to set off an explosion of bossa nova music on United States radio. His interest in South American culture was probably a contributing factor to his decision in 1958 to write and record a children's album about Christopher Columbus's journey to the New World, told from the perspective of Columbus's ships. The original album featured the voices of Eddie Albert, Ray's daughter Joanne Gilbert, Tony the Tiger himself, Thurl Ravenscroft, and Lee Miller. The album, entitled The Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, was supervised by Neely Plum, who would later go on to handle the 1965 soundtrack album For the Sound of Music. The album would sell well on the children's market, but Gilbert had higher hopes for the project than just a single vinyl release.
He's in the wrong harbor.
Will no one volunteer for his king and queen and country?
I will go.
Oh, that's Santa Maria. Oh, he's got a great sense of humor.
It will be a great honor for me to sail for our gracious king and queen. All my life I've longed to discover a new land.
The expansion of the project began in 1971 with a re-recording of the original album that would serve as the soundtrack for the finished animation. This time around, Sterling Holloway, the voice of Winnie the Pooh himself, would take over Eddie Albert's role as the narrator.
Oh, bother.
While Albert had simply been a voice narrating the action without participating directly, Holloway would narrate as Pegleg Pelican, a pelican with a peg leg and an eye patch. But only one of those could go into the name, so let's go with the one that's alliterative. Former sex symbol Janice Page would voice the Nina, emerging from the semi-retirement she had entered when she married Ray Gilbert in 1962. Voicing the Pinta would be former child actor and Gilbert's sometime songwriting partner, Sidney Miller, while the Santa Maria's dulcet tones would be provided by none other than Latin American heartthrob and the most iconic Joker of all time, Cesar Romero.
Why, you sniveling sardine!
Are you pompous, puffed up penguin?
Our friends make peace.
Have a shake on me.
Ooh, a joke a day keeps the gloom away.
The album released from Jelly Bean Productions, a company that had been founded by Gilbert himself. This time around, the title had been changed to We Think the World is Round, and the album would come packaged with a coloring book. As for the music on the album, it reused the same orchestrations that had featured on the 1958 version, filling in some of the gaps with royalty-free library music. Ray Gilbert would pass in 1976 from complications following open-heart surgery, but the work of turning We Think the World is Round into an animated film continued under the guidance of producer Kay Wright, who also worked on the project as an animator and had provided some of the character designs for the coloring book. Wright had begun her career as an in-betweener on Disney's Pinocchio and Fantasia before doing uncredited character animation on Sleeping Beauty and 101 Dalmatians. She would finally be credited as a full animator, starting with her work on television cartoons including The New Three Stooges, Spider-Man, and Groovy Ghoulies. In the director's chair for the project was Rudy Lariva. While Wright had started at Disney, Lariva was an alumnus of the Warner Brothers studio, having worked on the Looney Tunes series of shorts starting in 1939. He would make the jump into television animation with the Gerald McBoing Boing Show, but he also worked as an animator on one of the most recognized, parodied, and imitated opening sequences in the history of television, The Twilight Zone. In the 70s, his career would often intersect with Kay Wright's, including simultaneous stints on Sabrina the Teenage Witch, My Favorite Martians, and The Brady Kids. By 1979, Wright, Lariva, and their team would complete work on a 30-minute special intended for broadcast on television. The audio for the special was literally the exact same recording that had been used for the 1971 vinyl release, but mixed down into a mono version. While the show was destined for television, it would be screened in a nominating theater and submitted for Oscar consideration. It would not, however, be nominated, nor would it see broadcast in 1979, nor in 1980. In fact, the movie would hang around unaired for 5 years, finally premiering on television in 1984 for a special broadcast, before disappearing into the archives, only emerging once in 1992 for a series of airings on the Disney Channel and a VHS release on Turner Home Video, where it was labeled as an official licensed video of Spain USA Quintennial.
It's behind that big wave. No, it's all around us. The whole sea's bubbling and boiling. There it is. I knew it, I told you. It's a sea monster. See, with smoke and fire spouting from its mouth. It's green.
In fairness to Gilbert and everybody who worked on bringing the project to the screen, Gilbert never tried to pretend that his work was a piece of solid history. The original version carried the subtitle A Musical Fantasy, while the 1971 re-recording promised Peg-leg Pelican spins a rollicking, rolling fantasy. And it's not like anybody is complaining about the historical accuracy of a story where Columbus's 3 ships encounter a friendly sea serpent, who is later sent to them, presumably by God, because he appears in response to Santa Maria's prayers, shepherding a flock of flying fish, who use the wind from their wings to blow the ship's sails in the direction of the New World. And that's ignoring the fact that all 3 of the ship have faces that sing and talk. Do you realize how hard that is to ignore? Look at these faces. This is some Thomas and Friends Shining Time Station-ish a full 5 years before those shows first appeared on the BBC. But the problem with taking history and turning it into light-hearted children's fantasy is that it can help to perpetuate mythologies that are rooted in some of humanity's darkest tendencies. And in the process, it can help to reinforce ideas that make the world a much more frightening place.
Do not despair, my children. We must have faith. The Lord will answer our prayers.
And I'm backing it up with this gun that was lent from the National Rifle Association.
To start with, the special makes clear that Columbus and his crew, his ships, not his crew, were the only people who believed the world was round. That doesn't fit with what we know about that period in history, however. By 1492, Europe was very well acquainted with the idea of a round Earth. In fact, we know from his journals that while most of Europe believed the world to be round, Columbus believed the Earth was an exaggerated pear shape due to errors he had made in following the North Star's movement through the sky as he sailed. The idea that Europe pre-Columbus was in some pre-scientific dark age where people still saw the Earth as being pancake-shaped was originally pushed as part of a 17th century anti-Catholic campaign and had been seized upon and popularized by American author Washington Irving in the 19th century. It helps to boost a Protestant Eurocentric idea of the discovery of America while painting Columbus as a strong man with unwavering faith who was somehow foreordained to be the one to first set foot upon the New World. Well, again, first to set foot except for all of those tribes that had been living there for centuries, building pyramids and democratic societies, and also a bunch of Vikings who had built homes in Greenland.
Do you have a flag?
But you'd never really think of all those people living lives on the continent when what you really see on screen is 3 ships, a pelican, and a sea serpent. At least Columbus's crew gets to be a series of silhouettes at one point. The New World, when it finally appears on screen, is a lush, overgrown, and seemingly uninhabited wilderness that Santa Maria declares to be a paradise given to them by God. Given to them. As in, God looked at 3 ships sailing across the sea and said, "Here, have all this land. Don't mind the people who are already on it. They really don't count." Ooh, look at all of this gold we found just lying around for us. Nope. Put that right back where you found it right now. Well, what if I just put it in a museum for a few centuries?
Oh, bother.
And as if you needed more of a reminder that this project had its origins in the middle of the Cold War, that discovery of America is juxtaposed with the depiction of the moon landing. Once again, reiterating that all of these wild, unexplored spaces are granted by God to those who just have faith that they can get there. Luckily, there were no indigenous people on the moon for us to oppress. That we know of. Am I saying that We Think the World is Round, a television special for children that aired in 1984 and briefly again on the Disney Channel in the early 90s, is a cold-hearted piece of Eurocentric propaganda? Absolutely yes. But it's not necessarily the fault of the people who made it, because what Ray Gilbert created was a simple fantasy based around the history that he himself had been taught. And the same with many of the people who also worked on the project, who were mostly members of the same generation as Gilbert. These people were all dedicated artists trying to create a piece of children's entertainment that would also help to educate. But the history they were familiar with themselves had already been distorted and written to promote a certain worldview that they never paused to investigate on their own. And as a result, the only reliable piece of history you can really learn in the course of the 30-minute special is that there were once 3 ships named the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. And the song they sing about that is so catchy, you'll never forget it. Even when you're a 40-something elder millennial who saw the special exactly once when he was 4 years old. When Ray Gilbert passed away in 1976, Janice Page inherited all of his holdings, including the Ipanema Music Corporation, a music publishing firm that Gilbert had co-founded with Antonio Carlos Jobim. Page attempted to run the company herself for a while, but finally hired an administrator, which freed her up to try to relaunch her own singing career. She would later tell the Los Angeles Times that the first singing coach she hired in an attempt to get her voice back in shape pushed her too hard, too fast, to the point that she was no longer able to sustain a pitch. Doctors at Vanderbilt University in Nashville would examine her and conclude that her vocal cords had, in fact, been shredded, with x-rays showing that they were literally in tatters. Unwilling to give up, she started work with a new voice coach recommended by one of her doctors, who employed a system of very gentle, gradual practice, and 4 years later, she was once again able to carry a tune. And she later described the moment that she realized she could sing once again, saying that she burst into tears of joy. Janice Page is, as of this filming, one of the last surviving stars of the golden age of Hollywood, having turned 100 on September 16, 2022. So looking into the history of why Columbus was actually the first European to sail to the American continents, it's interesting to find out that basically everyone in Europe did believe the world was round, and a lot of mathematicians and navigators had calculated the circumference of the Earth pretty actually accurately. So they were of the opinion that you could sail out west, but if you sailed out that way, then the world was really, really big, and you might not have a place to actually put into port and resupply along the way. Columbus, however, insisted that while navigating the ocean himself, he had done his own calculations, and that the world was actually much, much smaller than everybody else had calculated. The first ever YouTube do-your-own-research sheeple commenter.
Oh, bother.
Columbus, as it turns out, was completely wrong. Everybody who had calculated the circumference back in Europe was right. He just turned out to be very fortunate in that there was a giant landmass in the middle of all of that water that nobody else in Europe had any reason to suspect was there. Thanks for checking out the video. What story or movie can you think of that, as a child, taught you something that you later found out just wasn't true? Or have you lived a charmed life of never being misled ever? Either way, drop into the comments below and let me know. And if you've made it this far, be sure to include the word pelican somewhere as our secret Cool Kids Club code word. Until next time, watch like it means something.